Hi and welcome back to the final instalment of myself and Rory's look back on the CB radio boom of the early 1980s. I really hope you've enjoyed the series so far and it's brought back a lot of memories for you. Okay, so I'm with Rory again for sort of episode 3 of this sort of podcast that we're doing, which is your idea, Rory, and I don't know about you, but I've really been enjoying it so far.
Oh, thank you.
It's been really good. So yeah, we spoke about the AM side of things in the early days, then the legalization of FMCB and sort of the move over to amateur radio, certainly for you. CB shops. So I get a lot of comments on my videos now saying, where can I find a good CB shop? And they really don't exist in any great volume anymore. Now, I know in Manchester area and the greater Manchester area, back in the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s, there was a lot of CB radio shops. And I did a video recently on Stockport CB Centre. So do you remember that place?
I do remember Stockport. I do. I'll take that point up. I do remember Stockport CB Centre, and if my memory serves me, and we are talking nearly 42 years ago, the man who ran it, I believe, was called Graham Stewart.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
And his father owned Stewart's Musical Instruments, which was on Higher Hillgate.
Right.
And he was an entrepreneurial type of guy. He was a business guy. He was a lovely man, very tall guy. He lived in Denton. He lived in Danebank in Denton. I seem to remember he drove a Ford Scorpio, a white Ford Scorpio. It's amazing the things you remember, isn't it, when you're firing up? And he ran Stockport CB Centre. And I think he started initially just trading from his house. I bought stuff from his house, aerials, mics, that type of thing. He was always on. He was down the road from where I lived.
Yeah.
And he would have a chat. His handle was the Music Man, I guess because of the musical connection.
Yeah.
And I think he was a musician as well. Yes, he was, because once he'd had a few beers, occasionally he'd sing you a bit of a song on the CB.
Right.
And he ran quiz nights and things. And he was a really, really nice guy. And I went down to his house quite often. And he sold. He was one of those shops that we talked about that sold CB equipment, but not CB radios.
Right. Okay.
But when he put it this way, not that he put in a shop window.
Yeah.
Okay. So
if you knew what to ask for, I
think there's stuff that went under the counter, but I never saw it myself. But I'm making a guess there. Yeah. And he ran it for years. And last time I saw him was, I think, in the 80s, if my memory serves me correctly. And he'd met someone. He met a new partner, and he was going to sell up his CB shop, and he was going to move to Cornwall and start a music shop up. And I suspect that he was a very smart businessman. I suspect he realised that CB was coming to the volume in bulk was coming to the end of it.
Yeah.
But you were right. And I can remember going down Deansgate in Manchester, and there was people selling CB accessories all along Deansgate. There's a shop that did photocopying, and it had a display of dummy loads and SWR meters and antennas in the window. And I went in, and there's people selling it. Anybody who could make a few bob out of selling CB equipment did. And there was lots of shops. People like Maplin, they sold a lot of CB equipment. There was Tandy, Radio Shack, they sold a huge amount. There was shops. There was a place in Urmston, a massive shop in Urmston that sold CB equipment, then ham radio equipment. But everywhere you went, you went into Rumbelows, which was like a place that sold kettles and all sorts of stuff. Anything you could plug into a wall, they sold stuff. Dixon's, of course. Remember old Dixon's? They sold it.
Yeah.
You went into some garages, independently owned garages, and they had a little display of CB equipment, a few aerials, microphones, patch leads, SWR meters.
Right. That's brilliant.
So it was everywhere you looked. We'd say you never guess who's selling CB equipment today.
Yeah.
And it really reached its peak, I think, probably in about 1982. I think
I suppose from in the years following that, it was just the diehards who, I mean, it was still popular well into the 90s, but like you say, the craze had gone. I think the ones that remained were probably the ones that were more into the radio side of things. It's probably a fair guess.
I suspect that a new craze had taken over, because at that point the Ataris and the Amiga computers were coming on, and people's shifted. People shifted, and also I think it's not insignificant that British Telecom was privatised. So what was quite expensive communications on the phone became cheaper.
Yeah.
So we moved into a more of a free. We're a command economy then. We moved into a mixed economy, and then moved into a free market economy. So I think the computers kind of took over. People, you could hear it on CB. People would share computer games, so they'd plug their cassette recorders in and transmit it across CB. Right. And then someone on the other end would record it, and it was just. And then slowly but surely, the kids grew up. The kids who had it grew up. They found boyfriends and girlfriends, or girlfriends and boyfriends, and silver rods that all over started to fall down and bend, and then
you just made me think. Then I drove up the A6 the other day through Stockport, and you can still see where there's been a couple of CB shops up that road. You can still see now there's remnants of antennas and stuff on the roofs. It's quite amazing. It's quite amazing.
The only CB antenna where I live is one just down the road from me, and I suspect it's still active because it looks in pretty good condition.
Yeah.
But they're on, these silver rods were on literally every street. One or two. I lived in a terrace street, and every street had them. Yeah. People used to dread it when another aerial went up, because it made more congestion, But eventually it just ran its course. I think people went on to the next thing, which was computers.
Yeah. And then of course into the 1990s, the mobile phone became affordable for the masses, and it was just I think that was just finished off completely. So another point I made when we spoke the other day, Cheeky Charlie.
Oh yes, characters. Yes. So one of the things that was a big background to certainly the FM CB scene were characters, people who were known by everybody and who spent a lot of time on CB. And I suspect some people spent a lot of time. I have to give credit. There's a lot of disabled people who use CB to keep in touch with people, which I think is marvelous. It's a marvelous thing. And there were a lot of lonely people out there who use CB. That was something that was again noticeable. But yes, there was a CB called Cheeky Charlie. Now she was called Mary. She lived in Denton, next door to Debdale Park.
Okay.
And she was considered by many a bit of a bane in people's lives, because she had an electronica special. Now, for those people who don't know what an electronica special is, it was an Italian high gain 5/8 11-meter antenna, and it had a loading coil at the bottom, and it had huge ground planes. And it was quite peculiar. Now, I'm not an expert on antennas. It's been a long time since I've looked into this, but apparently it transmitted in quite a wide frequency, and it would wipe out people's radios. So you could have somebody using an electronica special using 4 watts, someone using a 5/8 silver rod, and the 5/8 silver rod wouldn't really bother many people. The electronica special, it just flooded. And I don't know if that's the pattern of the radiation, or whether it produced harmonics. I never really got into that.
Yeah.
But Cheeky Charlie had one of these, and she was a stay-at-home mother, and she made a lot of friends on CB.
Yeah.
But she was never off it, and every time she keyed up, she would jam out everybody. And there was a massive debate on whether she had a linear amplifier. This was one of the big taboos.
Yeah.
I think people forget that when CB was legalized, you could only use a prescribed antenna on the roof.
Yeah.
And it mustn't have more than so much gain, and you had to run on 0.5 watt. I think it's a half or a quarter of a watt.
Right.
And of course, people really obeyed that. They put a 5/8 high gain aerial up and turned it up to 4 watts.
Yeah.
And she kind of, but people would be very displeased with people running linear amplifiers because they were very dirty.
Yeah.
And they transmit all over the band and block people's TVs out.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So sorry, Rory, were these something you could buy easily then, or were these
home? Yeah, you could buy linear amplifiers. You could
just ones that were bought.
You could just buy them anywhere. Stuart sold them, Stockport CB Centre sold them. I mean, they came in fairly late, the linear amplifiers.
Yeah. And
initially, I think they were just for AM. So people were using linears, usually I think with sideband radios.
Right.
And then you would get people who got things like summer camp coffee warmers, which were 25 or 40 watt ham radios, really, that were just they were just wide banded. And she made quite a few enemies, did Mary, and there's some hilarious stories. I mean, not that criminality is hilarious, but for the purpose of this interview, she had a Turner microphone. Is it a Turner microphone? I'm sure it was one of these desk mics.
Yeah.
And one day she was chatting away to a friend, and the doorbell went, and we could hear the conversation at the door, and it was a taxi driver.
Right.
And the taxi driver was saying something along the lines of, "Right, come on, Mary, we're going to the airport now. Your son's waiting for you." And she's going, "Oh, I've got some going to the airport." And she said, the taxi driver said, "Oh, it's all right. Your son says you get confused. Now, come on." And he was literally dragging her down the path until she convinced him that A, she didn't have a son, or her son hadn't phoned the taxi, and B, that someone was winding it up. And when she dropped the key, there was a chorus of people shouting, "Taxi for Mary."
Yeah.
And of course, that would be considered harassment nowadays, I guess.
Yeah.
I did hear that she'd had a coax sabotage. People had put pins into the coax and put a 12-volt battery across it, and someone had hidden a jammer, a low wattage transmitter. Because she lived next door to a park, so I mean, you can hide it anywhere.
Yeah.
But she persisted. She would persist, and she didn't seem to get the fact that other people wanted to use the band. She was permanently on it, and she'd give monologues on things. So she was a real character.
Yeah. I bet there was a lot of them. Around as well. Just before you carry on, when you say about jammers there, you made me think. I was actually sent. I had a PO box running for a while with a friend of mine, and I was sent an original jammer that the Laughing Policeman Wireless Society, which I'm sure you've heard of, that they hit a radar station in Malvern to block a local repeater. And the whole jamming side, obviously don't condone it, but that whole jamming side of things really sort of intrigues me. And hiding jammers in the parks and stuff, that's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're a bit more egalitarian, the people who jammed on CB. I mean, there's one guy who used to play Bob Marley's Jamming.
Yeah, we jamming.
which I think he's getting the point across. But there was a lot of that, and I think it was born. I think it was born from frustration, but I think it was also born from the fact that some people are just not very nice to each other. This inhibition.
Was there much in the way of cars being broken into for rigs and
I had my CB stolen out of my car. I had it was quite a cheap one, but it was stolen. Someone tried to steal my aerial, and someone actually stole. When I put my ham radio aerial up, I had my CB aerial in the backyard, and someone nicked it, and it went up on top of a pub. It was a very unusual aerial. It was a very, very, very unusual aerial, and it was on the top of someone's pub. And I thought, well, good luck to them. Really, I wasn't going to use it again. But people would steal. There's a lot of CBs being stolen. And in fact, Graham. There was a well-known CBer in Hattersley who was very loud. He came across very powerfully, so we think we probably used a linear.
Okay.
And Graham Stewart, the guy on Stockport DC Centre, he had a CB, and he had a very, very unusual Roger Bleep.
Right.
And it was so unusual that no one else had ever got one, and he wouldn't tell us anywhere he got it from. And one day his car was broken into in Denton, and his CB was stolen. And then this character in Hattersley was using it, and we could tell it was him because he didn't know there was a Roger Beep on it.
Right.
And it was. I want to say it was a bird chirping. It was so unusual.
Yeah.
And it was obviously his CB.
Right.
But yeah, there was a lot of theft. And people, once people, and it was hard times. It was people were unemployed. There wasn't a lot of opportunity. We were still in punk rock to some extent. So people are doing the best they can. I don't condone stealing, but they're selling it for a few bob maybe.
I suppose a cheap CB back then wasn't cheap for everyone.
No, I mean, they weren't cheap, but they were like with everything that you steal, they're a form of currency. People probably would leave them behind now.
Yeah, definitely. Saying that though, about 18 months ago, I left a Sirio mag mount on the roof of my car, and I'd gone into somewhere, I hadn't been long, and I come back out and it had been stolen.
Oh gosh!
And that's I'm talking 2021 here. So someone had a Sirio mag mount on me. So thanks for that if you're watching. It was So I was surprised, and it was someone who was into CB because there was a 270 mag mount on the car as well, and that had been left behind. So it was someone who was into CB who was probably watching this video.
Give it him back, eh? If you're watching this, you've got to give it him back.
Yeah. So can you think of any other sort of any other unusual characters around them days? Cheeky Charlie's
Cheeky Charlie's. I mean, there were a plethora of people who used echo microphones.
Yeah.
So you'd hear there was a guy from the Great Orme, and I don't remember his call sign now, but he would come booming across, and he would run a net every day from about 9 till 10:30. He would run a net for people who are driving in, and he had an echo mount. He sounded like he was in a cave, so he'd say hello, and it'd go hello, hello, and drove you nuts, and people were well known in their area. Our group was quite well known. We had a little group called the Alpha Hotel Group,
right?
And we were quite well known.
So what did Alpha Hotel stand for?
Abbey Hay, where I lived.
Oh, Abbey Hay, right? Okay. Yeah.
And we had QSL card made, and it was a bit of fun at the time. I think we were trying to be a bit exclusive, maybe. And I think maybe people didn't like us for it, but when you're younger, you do these things, and there's quite, and then of course there were specific DX groups. So we talked a lot about AM and FM, but there were specific groups who used sideband. There was Brown Bear, a guy called Brown Bear, and I had a little job for Brown Bear sleep in. So my little job was when I was driving past, was to give him a call, and I was his alarm clock every day.
That's amazing.
I'd say 19 Brown Bear, are you up yet?
Yeah.
And that's it. Wakey, wakey, rise and shine. He's Brown Bear on 19.
Yeah, and did he respond?
I did hear this. Oh, yeah, is that you, Cossack? And I go, Roger that, So yeah, and there's people using CBs as, I think that reminds me, it's people using CBs as baby monitors.
Really?
There's people like Brown Bear and DXs, people who are DX, and they moved really. They were in a different tribe to AM. They were interested in DXing. They had, like behind me here, they would have Yagi aerials, linears, and they would work the skip. And you saw a lot of those perched on roofs, I have to say. 11 meter Yagis.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a few truck drivers, that I couldn't remember the handles, but Cheeky Charlie, I don't think anybody could. In your comments bar, there will be people who know Cheeky Charlie.
Yeah, well, if you remember Cheeky Charlie, then leave a comment. Yeah. I think just going back to those sort of group, like say Alpha Hotel and those groups, I think from some of the stuff that I've got in the vault, for want of a better word, it's we've said, I think we said in previous installments we've done, that there was a massive thing for inclusion, and there's some of these groups. I've got the original members list that are photocopied, that were originally typed up on a typewriter, and one of them, I don't know which one is. I think he's Ale Town Breakers. So Ale Town was the TV slang for Altrincham. They had 1,000 members.
Yeah,
1,000 members, and of course, not all of them were from Altrincham. They would have been from other places, and you see the same call signs and handles on different listings. So you someone like you, for example, would have probably joined an Ashton Breakers group, Ale Breakers group, Tameside Good Buddies. I think a lot of them, they joined every single group that they could, because they probably just paid 50p to join, and there was they organize. I've got invites which I'll put on the screen here. I've got the ABC and STB. So ABC's Ale Town Breakers, STB, I can't remember what, something Town Breakers, I can't remember, but it's at the Moss Trooper Hotel in Timperley. It's a town and country night, Friday the 19th of March 1982, and this is a ticket. And I've got other ones as well for like discos, and it's just brilliant. That some of the little events that these sort of groups were pulling together.
You just reminded me, there was a charity event that was done on Werneth Low. People went to camp out on Werneth Low,
right?
And they ran a charity breaking marathon, 48-hour non-stop CB marathon,
right?
And they raised money for charity. I think they all pitched little tents up on Werneth Low. Is like some high ground just outside Manchester.
Well, anyone watching this channel, I'm obsessed with Werneth Low. That's like my go-to place. I would love that. You know what's even more amazing is probably somebody has probably got tape recordings of all these things in the cupboards and lofts, and I hope one day stuff like this surfaces, because it'd be brilliant.
Yeah, well, I know a good friend of mine who will be watching this, who has a huge library. So all I will say, listener, you know who to get in contact with.
I've got, a lot of people send me recordings. I've got loads of recordings in there. I've actually got some audio, which I'll have to send you. I have played on the channel before, of a CB operator in 1979. And it's cringeworthy to listen to, but it's funny. Really, really funny sort of...
people did, I have to say, thinking about it now, people did adopt American accents, which was a bit bizarre.
Yeah, well, this guy in this clip is doing it. Yeah, that's crazy.
And they found out they lived in Bolton, but they were talking like they were from Arkansas. They were great days, and there were days of social change. I mean, it was you can't just talk about the developments of radio communication without kind of linking it to social change. It was social change. To put it in perspective, well, we were getting CB radios, which the then government were really against. We won that battle. There was a guy who published a book called Spycatcher, which was about, he was a former secret agent, and he was dishing the beans on, and they wouldn't allow it. The government wouldn't allow it to be published in the UK. So you can see that actually it was a grassroots rebellion, really. It was very small, a very small way, but we the people who adopted AMCB and took the risk of fines and all sorts of things, actually paved the way for PMR communication, all sorts. The band plan opened up, and we were away, really.
A lot of the ones that were raided, I've seen things where they'd be raided. They'd obviously warn everyone in the local area, and then they'd go straight to the CB shop and buy the rig and be back on the air the same day. Much the way that radio pirates were, they would taken off the air and then back on the air the same day. And,
I think there's an addictive element about it, And I knew, I'd heard of breakers who had the radios taken off, and before they'd even pack them in the back of the police wagon, they were wiring up the next one.
Right. So, Rory, I think that just about covers everything that you need to know about the CB scene in Manchester during the 80s. So, I think we've covered some great topics. I'm sure it'll get the conversation going in the comments on these episodes. And from me to you, thanks for coming on the channel. It's something I've not done before, but I've really enjoyed it. It's been a massive learning for me. So yeah, I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, first of all, thank you for producing such a wonderful YouTube channel, so informative, and
I didn't pay him to say that, by the way.
No, he didn't pay me to say that, but that's how I found you. I found you like a lot of people. I was browsing YouTube, came across you, and I found your content really riveting and I think quite relevant. And I hope all I'll hope is that my memory is accurate. We are talking of events that were over 40 years ago. But I'll be interested, in the comments if anybody remembers those days, and maybe if they remember the old Cossack in his Lada car. Good old days, eh?
Yeah. Right. Well, Rory, I think we'll wrap that one up. But yeah, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it, and I know from the chats we've had, we've got a couple of sequels lined up on other radio related topics as well. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rory. So I hope you enjoyed our series on the heyday of CB radio. If you have any similar memories to share, then please do so in the comments. And if you'd like to see more of this content on the channel, then please let me know.
He's having a little rest. You've got Captain Kirk back. Shall we leave or what? Yeah, no, man, I really, bad way.